Now we have our next speaker, Mr. Patrick, CEO of Reconomy Comply Division. Sir, for your special address, sir, requesting you to kindly come on dais.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me and having the ability to share our experiences in that part and give you a little bit background of, to the point, what is a facilitator? How do we operate in other parts of the market to principally help to all the points that were mentioned already about bringing all the stakeholders together and through this developing that ecosystem in a coherent way to be, on the one hand, compliant, but I think much, much more to make circular economy something real and something that is operational, working, but that is also economically working. And with this, to give you an insight a little bit on how we make that management of that facilitation in here. We as RLG, we're acting on a global scale. So you can see we have offices all around the globe. We're servicing 80 countries throughout 24 regional setups, and we're active in India here since 2017. Started off in the e-waste area and did exactly the same thing that we're now looking into the new areas being covered by the regulations, so the batteries, the tires, packaging waste and everything, in principle acting in a similar way in those setups. Well, how do you enable circular economy? And the approach that we think is necessary to make it an effective setup is that you need to take an holistic end-to-end approach. You need to understand from the generation of material, after the usage of material, all the streams of the circles that happen from there that go into a potential reuse of the product itself after a refurbishment or remanufacturing process, all the way then to the recycling as the final cycle and the resource recovery that we're looking for. But only if you understand all cost elements in the whole process and all value elements in the process, that the credits are a supply and demand market, independent from what is happening on the ground, because industry needs credits to fulfill compliance. And again, in the passive approach, you're out there buying your credits and the price is what it is on a supply and demand setup. The compliance risk part is, again, well, if you're actively in it, you can ensure that the right things are happening on the ground. You can build in processes that help you to control everything that is happening there, versus in a credit system, it's on the recycling industry to do the right things. So you don't have to control that, but with this, you also could run the risk that not the right ethical things are happening in the market. The transparency, having a knowledge of mass flow, understanding which volumes are generated where, helps you in the end to optimize that ecosystem, to optimize logistical elements in those setups, again, to build a geographical network between collection and recycling that brings efficiency in its overall setup. Where, on the other hand, a pure credit thing looks very simple and you say, I don't need to manage that ecosystem in that whole part. But you're also somewhat out of hand, because if the recyclers don't get enough material, if the recyclers are not processing it in the right way, they will not be able to deliver the credits. So even if you have a contract with the recycler to say, I take so much tonnage of credits from you, if they in the end cannot deliver, no credits. So it is again to the point of how active you want to be in managing those setups, and through this principally control your own destiny as an industry in that setup. And how sustainable is that setup, not as a sustainability of the industry, but as a sustainability of the ecosystem that we build, then you can clearly see if you manage it in an overall holistic approach, you can scale it, you can drive economic efficiency in that whole setup, and use platforms through parties like RLG, for example, that can support you in building a vast ecosystem around that and drive scalability, versus individual recyclers will always have a limitation in the room that they can work on and the capacity that they have. So through this, they also have a limited scalability in its setup, which is just in the nature Looking into Germany, we have a setup there that is a voluntary system. So it is not regulated around the tires. It is purely on the industry to say, please take care of this. And it is strongly driven not by the producers that sell themselves. It is strongly driven on the retail side, where the tires are being sold and where tires are being collected back. Mid of the 90s, we had no regulations on EPR. Well, the whole packaging thing just started. But we came up with landfill bans, which just simply said we have no space anymore to landfill. We need to take care of different ways in here. We had no recycling of tires at that point as well. There was some co-processing in cement factories of tires, and again, no EPR or collection system being established. So voluntary, this was driven. The repair workshops and the industry said we should set something up and work with this. It was at that point a zero cost model, because you on the one hand had the logistical cost for the collection and partially cost for landfill. So it took us time to stop the landfill of these things as well, versus an income of selling of second-hand tires that were reusable, a remanufacturing of tires, which was pretty common back in the 90s, and a co-processing with the cement industry. In 2015, 20 years later, we were in a fully established collection mechanism, voluntarily driven, but very efficient, and it was a positive net cost. So in the end, the retail side made money out of the collection of the tires, in the way that they had to pay for the collection and the logistics in the setup, but on the other hand, the income of the sale of second-hand tires, of the remanufacturing and the co-processing income as well were higher than the cost, so it was a positive net setup. Only 7 years later, the whole thing has completely turned around, to the point that there's a minimum reusable tire, because we have a lot of cheap tires flooding the market, that people do not buy second-hand tires anymore because the price gap between a new tire and the second-hand tire is relatively small. So that market imploded. We suddenly have, remanufacturing is non-existent anymore. So nobody's revulcanizing tires anymore in those setups in Germany. And we now have cost for the disposal. So co-processing can only happen when you pay that they take the material today, because they're flooded with material. And these are changes that is like Chinese swartzing. We're sitting on a lot of packaging waste now in Europe that cannot be transported anywhere else anymore. That goes into co-processing. So there's much, much more material available in the market that you cannot say, I get money for it because it's valuable for the co-processors. They now ask for money if they take the tires. So we saw in 7 years that the whole thing completely turned around, and now it is a net cost to the industry for the disposal of the tires. Nevertheless, because we have built very efficient mechanisms before, the cost of the system is only roughly 10% of the cost that we see in EPR-based systems, like, for example, in Italy, which is not too far away from Germany in its setup. So again, the investment in controlling, building up those networks and managing them helped us that even in such a turnaround situation in the market that happened on that part, that the impact could be controlled. Well, and if we look into the end of life tire recovery of the materials in there, there are various ways how you technically can do that. And it comes again to the point of how can we now support in the building of that ecosystem that the recyclers can focus on recycling technology, on highest resource recovery, and support the industry with the materials to come back and come into a reuse, either in tires again, through pyrolysis processes and every other way that helps to recover black mass and reuse it in the tires, or of granulating the materials and bringing it in a way that it can be used in other appliances and in other products going forward. So again, from the collection supported all the way to the technology development, so that that new ecosystem around the tires becomes what we want it to be, a circular economy setup. Thank you.